Hey, Clint.
Yes, Brigid.
What do you think the swarm's love language is?
Oh, man, that's a great question. Acts of service. Got to be acts of service, right?
That's a good one. I was going to say physical touch.
Oh, also that. Love that. Maybe that's...
Very intimate physical touch.
As we will learn this time.
Push the button.
Clint, we launched our podcast.
We did. We absolutely launched our podcast. This is our first episode since we did launch earlier this month, December. We're recording this in December. That was fun. Definitely want to thank everyone who has listened, subscribed, or rated our little project.
Yes.
Lots more people listen to this thing than I thought would.
Me too.
Nice. Yeah. We had a lot of fun talking to folks in the Captives War subreddit and other places about the podcast. Got a lot of really sweet feedback that I think we both really appreciated. And we are really looking forward to doing much more of that in the future. But other than that, Brigid, I have some good news and some bad news about the launch. Which do you want to hear first?
The good news, please.
Excellent. By my calculations, and this is true, we are the world's most popular podcast dedicated to the Captives War, which is an incredible achievement.
That's amazing. We're so good at this.
Yes.
Now give me the bad news.
Yeah, so the bad news is, by my calculation, we are the world's least popular podcast dedicated to the Captives War.
Oh, can't win them all.
Suboptimal, not great.
But
anyway.
Isn't it true that we're the only podcast dedicated to the Captives War? Don't we have a monopoly?
I think we do. At least I was not able to find any other ones. And so therefore we are both the most and least popular podcast in this space. And I think we've cornered the market. And as somebody who used to work in antitrust law, I think that's anti-competitive. And so if you are listening to this and you know of other fan creators, be it podcasts or other types of fan creators, I don't know, Tumblr or Blue Sky or I don't know, whatever fans do, please let us know. We'd love to have a bunch of folks playing in this space alongside us. Yeah, we just don't want to be talking to ourselves.
Yeah. We have been having a good time in the Reddit, and it's a lot more fun than most Reddit conversations.
Yes.
I feel like the fans of this...
That is the lowest of bars, but yes, that is true.
I feel like the fans of this James S.A. Corey extended universe are just a better group of people than fans of other sci-fi franchises and more fun to talk to.
Given that those are the people who are most likely listening to this podcast, I agree.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah. Suck up to the audience, baby. Should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it. Oh my gosh, I love this. Turnabout is a great section of this book and very involved. So here we go.
Great.
Okay. Ekur-Tklal, or E.T., as we will often call him, is here to tell us more reasons that the Carryx are right, actually. It says that the Carryx Empire was about exploration, not preservation, because only a nincompoop would attempt to preserve anything in the face of an ever-changing universe.
Yeah, this part I laugh at because clinging to things that are foolish and futile and doomed is the whole point of human society. It's why we do things like donate to charities, or have children, or play the lottery, or root for the Detroit Lions. All of these things are foolish and futile and doomed, and yet we do them anyway. So, Ekur-Tklal, GTFO, buddy.
Yes, please, GTFO. E.T. goes on to explain that by learning about other species, it actually means enslaving them or exterminating them. The weeding a garden metaphor comes up again, and it's giving Age of Exploration when Western colonizers tried to make their idea of a garden out of the whole New World in Africa, regardless of the humans they weeded out in the process. Then, reading him for filth, you know? Then Ekur says this: "You condemn us even as you follow our example, and with your foot on my neck, I applaud you." Let's pick apart what he might mean by "even as you follow our example."
Great question. Yeah. Do you think that the great enemy could be on the verge of exterminating the Carryx then?
I do think that.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think that's the implication, right? And it's the final statement of Ekur-Tklal, so they're going to kill him or it, whatever they're going to do to the rest of the Carryx. And so I think that's what James S.A wants us to think, is that the great enemy, be it they're humans or somebody else, are about to wipe out the Carryx. But I think we should leave open the possibility that Ekur-Tklal means something else, and including that perhaps the great enemy is now enslaving the Carryx for their own ends, like the way the Carryx have enslaved everyone else. I think that's a possibility.
I love that possibility, and I think that this part actually lends itself to that a lot, because some of us are trying so hard to learn everything about the Carryx. Perhaps to the same way the Carryx are trying to learn everything about all of the other species. It's like, are we learning about them, or are we going to enslave them? We don't know.
We don't know, yeah. And so I think the other thing that I wanted to point out about the beginning is that this is the first part of the running theme of Turnabout in this part. This part is called Turnabout. There's going to be a bunch of turnabouts in this episode that we're going to talk about. And from Ekur-Tklal's perspective in this little entree that he mentions, the great enemy has turned the tables on it. You condemn us even as you follow our example. That's a turnabout. There will be more examples of turnabouts as we go forward.
Yes, we'll have a little ding noise that comes up whenever there's a turnabout.
That's a good idea.
All right, chapter 20. We are hanging out with Jesson and Campar as they go to the research alcove to fetch the proteomic dictionary. Campar carries on a back and forth about how Tonner would still have picked Jesson even knowing her condition. Jesson is sure he wouldn't have, agreed, but appreciates the distraction. She, Campar, and Ricker are all three pretty nervous and carrying makeshift weapons. Campar compares academic researchers to finches, who are pretty to look at and keep singing until they drop over dead. Vivid. And as Clint's girlfriend Steph pointed out, an allusion to Darwin's finches and the genesis of the theory of evolution. Also a big theme.
Yep.
Jesson quips that at least they're pretty to look at. We stan a confident queen. Jesson recounts at this time also the first of her episodes. Her parents were minimally present due to work, and Jellet was the one to realize something was wrong. He, being a child, had been disappointed to learn that one visit to a psychiatrist hadn't fixed her. She had told him not better, just improved.
Yeah, I like this little note because it seems like the authors are trying to tell us that Jesson was a working class kid. Yeah. Because she mentions that her dad worked on contracts on ice floes, and I don't really know what that means, but are the contracts like fishing or, I don't know, mining, ice mining or whatever that, I don't know what you would do. And then she says that her mom took double shifts, and she says that her mom took double shifts to keep up their contribution to the village. I thought that was interesting because it makes me wonder whether Ajian had like more of a social society economic model, like they had to get money to contribute to the wealth of the village. We don't get a whole lot of information about the economic model, whether they're like communist or socialist or, you know, regular old capitalist like we are. But that stood out to me because she's not taking double shifts to, you know, put food on the table for Jesson and Jellet. It's to keep up their contribution to the village, which I thought was interesting.
Super interesting. It could also be a direct labor contribution, like if they have...
Sure.
I don't know.
It takes a village, you know?
Yeah. Like in syndicalism, everyone would just have like an assigned task. Or whatever. It's a tantalizing detail. The first time I read that part, I thought he was doing research on ice flows. I was like, I guess he's a scientist too. But then on reread, it's like, no. Jessen's internal monologue reassures her that this project to produce her meds will fail one way or another, and anyway, it was still her fault that Irina was dead, and so she probably deserves to feel like refried rat shit forever. But hey, if the medication didn't work, she could always kill herself later. Remember, folks, you can always kill yourself later, but once you're dead, all the other options are closed. When they get to the lab, it's important to remember. When they get to the lab, it's not as bad as she remembered. Ricker offers to look out while Campar and Jessen, who are both thick as mud and ungodly strong, pry out the proteomic dictionary. While they pry, Jessen reflects that it sort of sucks that Cinia isn't helping, even though their lives depend on their success. But on the other hand, who cares? They're all in hell with no escape.
Yeah, the line is, they were in hell, she could burn in whatever way suited her. Which, great
Juicy.
Line.
Really good.
Yep.
She also mentions that Dafyd had wandered off in search of other humans, like maybe Jellet?
Perhaps. Mayhaps.
Maybe Jellet? They're mid-pry fest when those gosh darn night drinkers show back up way across the cathedral. While the three of them wait for the little bastards to approach, Jessen reflects that she absolutely hates the cathedral space and all its alien life forms. What might have once been fascinating is repulsive to her. The night drinkers arrive and she can't understand their language, but she's sure there are words in it. Then a night drinker makes a face that reminds her of a grin and she hulks out again. The feather monkeys run away and Jessen follows, remarking that humans are endurance hunters. Campar and Ricker voice opposition to Jessen hunting down the night drinkers, but follow along with her anyway, weapons in hand. They follow the little group of feather monkeys until they kind of split apart, and the one they're tailing gets more and more scared and desperate. Finally, it jumps into a little hole in the wall, and Ricker realizes they've found the night drinker's nest. Jessen threatens them, and the elation and rage lasted almost 2/3 of the way back to their alcove. Quote unquote. And then her black mood comes back.
Yeah, so this is also a turnabout. Ding. Right? When Jessen explicitly threatens the night drinker. That's what we said. We're doing dings, right,
I know.
Brigid?
I forgot about the ding. Yeah.
You brought it up. All right, so ding. And so when Jessen is like, I know where you fuckers live, which is, I think, exactly what she says.
Yeah.
And we know that the night drinkers have a translator box because they surrender it later. So they can understand Jessen's threat, and that makes the night drinker's subsequent attack, which we will get to in this part later, to the humans' home base make more sense. The night drinkers are rationally sort of making a preemptive strike to, try and get them to not attack the night drinkers' lair, right?
Yes, and that's such a good point. And to them, they were probably like, whoa, we just attacked your workspace. Now you're coming to our house.
Exactly.
Really great catch that they do have a translator box and thus understand what you said.
Yep.
Ricker and Campar are both drunk on the power of it. Campar calls Jessen their war leader. Jessen notes that the monkeys are a 10-minute walk from their lab and they never saw them. Campar says Tonner has kept their world small, all except young Alcor. Then Ricker defends Tonner a little, which Jessen finds weird. They get back to the alcove, and the amount of stuff they have to do to get back in business feels to Jessen like, quote, preparing to swim across an ocean, which was the same as preparing to drown.
Oof.
Relatable. Jessen and Campar have a sweet little moment that nevertheless makes her miss Jellet. Then Jessen laughs and says that's the first time in a long time anything's been afraid of a human.
Yeah, I love that part where Jessen sort of leans on Campar and thinks that Campar is big as strong as an oak. But then even he had a panic attack, and it makes Jessen feel better to remember that even though he is so strong, he can have moments of weakness too. It's a nice little part.
Yeah. I love all the ways that they are so human, even in little interpersonal things. That's not always something that sci-fi keeps emphasizing through the story. Sometimes it's like, okay, we know these characters, but like the real stuff is the aliens and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But these books, it's really like they keep being so full.
Yeah.
Chapter 21. Dafyd tries to convince himself he's not scared, he's curious, spider therapy style. He's on his way to the librarian. Spider therapy. He's on his way to the librarian and taking in once more the grand, mind-boggling scale of the buildings they're in. When Dafyd starts to feel overwhelmed by the size of it all, he asks himself questions, and his curiosity wins out over fear, and he wants to know everything about this place.
Yeah, in this part, he wonders who built the ziggurats that they're in, and we find out in the next part, which we will cover in the next episode, that it wasn't the Carryx who built this. It was the Phylarchs of Ostradime, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Yeah.
They sound so beautiful, and as a sort of horse girl, I love them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Dafyd waits his turn to speak to the librarian of the human moiety, because another Carryx is talking to their librarian, and he's like, I bet if I interrupt, they'll kill me.
Yeah.
The loser librarian, who is not E.T., says, your errand in coming determines whether your timing is appropriate, and Dafyd thinks it might be amused. Not for long, though, because Dafyd asks if he can learn at the librarian's side, and the librarian goes into smacking mode.
That's good, yeah.
Dafyd bows again and says he thought the humans could serve the Carryx better with more knowledge. The librarian says animals do not choose their essential nature and place in society. And the translation box has a little trouble wording this so that a little human can understand it. Dafyd, still bowing on the floor, apologizes for his mistake and says, I'm young. The librarian, I don't know how he figured out to say I'm young, but he says it every time he's apologizing, and it works.
Yeah, there must have been a part earlier where somebody else said I am young, and it worked. I'll have to go back and look at that. Yeah.
The librarian dismisses him, and he backs out, and then when out of sight, lets himself have a little nervous breakdown. Then he asks himself why the Carryx was so against the idea. He tries to memorize their conversation for later analysis.
Yeah, essential nature and place in society is a very Platonic phrase. Of course, the Carryx like Plato's Republic, the worst thing that they force every philosopher and political science major to read all the time. I do, before we get too far, I want to mention, because this is Dafyd showing up to talk to the Carryx like a psychopath or like a maniac. Something that occurred to me after we recorded last time, before Dafyd went to, basically ask one of the Carryx, hey, where can I find my librarian? Right before that, they're in the lab, and Else touches his arm. And we made a big deal about that in the last episode because I thought it was, like a romantic gesture. And it could have been just the romantic gesture. But I'm wondering now whether it was the swarm influencing Dafyd to be a little bit more reckless or courageous or whatever. And that's how he got the gumption up to talk to the Carryx. That's crazy.
That's totally possible. I mean, we know that the swarm is influencing the humans with, what are they called? Pheromones?
Chemoreception, yeah.
Yeah. And often he does something really crazy right after she touches him.
Right? Okay.
So let's keep track of that, too. That we'll have a different sound for that.
Yeah.
Dafyd hangs out in the cathedral for a while. Oh, also, this is at least the second. We were just talking about classical philosophy earlier. Do you want to get into that?
Sure. Let's talk about classical philosophy. I'm always down.
I don't know anything about it really, except for memes about the cave. But so essential nature and places in society is all Platonic like, and then we found out the mercy of God is like kind of a stoicism quote.
Yes. I will get into that, I think, later at the end. I have a quote that I just pulled. But just briefly to talk about the essential nature and place in society, for folks who have read the Plato's Republic, everybody thinks about the allegory of the cave, which is sort of the good part of Plato's Republic. The rest of Plato's Republic is about how when you're born, you're essentially represent various metals, and like if you're gold, that means you're a philosopher king and you should be a philosopher king, and if you're silver, you should be like a member of the oligarchy. And if you're, I don't remember what it is, iron or bronze or whatever it is, you're just a regular old person. And that is your essential nature and place in society. And you are just a plebe that should do your work and suck it up. And that is how societies are good. And that is like almost exactly what the Carryx are reflective of. Like
That's
I said,
true.
I'll get into a little bit more about philosophy, and I'm sorry for doing this. I really can't help myself, but I really can't. I'm sorry, but I think that there is something to it, and I think it does add to an understanding of the general story structure to look at this from a philosophical lens, because I think that James is doing this intentionally.
I am sure. And the other thing that I know about classical philosophy is that return bros with marble sculptures in their avatar always are really into Plato and Stoicism.
Yep.
So what you're telling me is that the Carryx are Ayn Randian return bros.
Yes, they definitely have Molon Lab in their Twitter bio, and are like, they think that 300 was a documentary. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Dafyd hangs out in the cathedral for a while, hoping to see another human and watching out for night drinkers. He also thinks about how being around the research all the time is actually worse than being lonely. Dafyd sees a Carryx that reminds him of the hallway crows librarian, and then he realizes he hasn't seen any hallway crows in a while. He goes back to the team's apartment niche, where Campar is telling everyone about Jesson going on the warpath. He notes that it's strange to see Jesson smiling. Bearing in mind that the night drinkers are soft-bodied monkeys the size of an 8-year-old with no special strength or even very good claws, is pretty primal how thrilled they are about this.
It's true.
They intimidated a bunch of Care Bears.
Yeah.
And it's also the Soft Lothark version of them. It's a bunch of Soft Lothark fucking nerds.
That's true.
It's not the Soft Lothark warriors. Tonner
You
demands...
mean the Night Drinker Warriors?
Yeah, sorry. It is the Soft Lothark warriors. It's not the Night Drinker warriors.
Yes.
Thank you. Tonner demands to know what Dafyd got on his expedition. Less than I'd hoped, Dafyd shrugs. Wow, Tonner can't get no respect around here. Campar explains, like, Dafyd's just like, you're not the boss of me. I'm not going to tell you. Campar explains that Jesson's medication is non-toxic to the berries, but it's still unknown if they can express the chemical. Dafyd thinks about telling the whole story of how he almost became pink mist, but instead asks how he can help.
Yeah, I love this bit because Dafyd thinks about whether or not he should tell the team the story of the Carryx almost killing him, but he doesn't want to sound dramatic or unbelievable, so he saves it for later. And I think he does this because he's hyper aware of the perception of others, and so he does subtle things to influence that perception, and he didn't want to, like, take Jesson's thunder by being like, oh yeah, well, I almost got killed. And
yeah, totally.
Yeah, so it's a more good characterization of Dafyd as a subtle manipulator.
Yeah. He also, I think, realizes that what he did learn, which was significant, would be too complicated. Like, he wouldn't be able to explain to Tonner why it was important.
Right.
It's just not how Tonner thinks. So the rest of the day passes in sort of a new normal. The team briefs each other on new information and works on prepping samples. Dafyd notes that the social and work relationships, as well as their new routines, are still in flux after Irena's death. Tonner is no longer organizing everyone's schedule, and Ricker is part of the group again. So much so that Ricker relieves Dafyd for the night, and Ricker and Tonner kid around a little bit. Dafyd takes a shower and tries to find what he's missing from the big picture. Then, Else sneaks into his room and hops in bed with him. Dafyd considers wondering what Tonner will think, and then says, fuck it. The sound of her skin against his was like a soft wind in the desert. What a line. So pretty.
Yeah.
These guys also live in the desert. So
that's a good
the
point.
authors do. So I'm like,
yeah.
We shift to the swarm's perspective, and it is a hot mess in there. The dead
Wait a
girl.
minute. Hang on. We shift to whose perspective?
Oh my God. The swarm. And it is a hot mess in there. The dead girl is disgusted and accuses Else of jumping into bed with the highest profile male and also of violating the ethics of not fucking your research assistant.
Yeah.
Else wants to disagree. This part is so hard on Else, and I find it a little unfair. Else wants to disagree, but kind of feels like she is a little bit of a status fucker. So she tries to find a way to be mean to Amir, but there isn't enough left of Amir to make fun of, which is pretty sad. I don't like how Else is like a mean girl. Like,
yeah, it's a little bit slut-shamey, right? I mean, but also she is in response trying to, like, as you say, make fun of Amir.
Like, I think Amir's point is valid that she's being a little unethical, but also, and Amir has like a history about that. But then I don't know, the swarm is like, oh, she's humiliated by me watching her have sex with Dafyd. Like, yeah. Of course he is. The swarm observes the ways sex between humans reinforces emotional connections and also finds the process undignified, which humiliates Else.
Only if you do it right.
However, the swarm feels warm and almost loving towards Else. Then it turns to mining Dafyd about information about the many soldier Carryx he saw in the cathedral. The swarm knows any big changes likely presage a shift in the war. It is itching to pass on the information it learned, even after banging.
Yeah, the swarm will kiss and tell. It'll spill the tea to the group chat, which I don't think is cool. Have some respect, swarm.
Swarm, please. Some class. Passing its information to leadership will it require it to leave the planet in this lovely little bubble of found family. Else tells the swarm, it was you who wanted and orchestrated this, even though you blame me. I hardly run this place anymore. Why did you want this? The swarm reflects that it is very human to want something without knowing why. Then it does something else very human, which is put aside all higher thoughts and just get horny with some strange.
Hell yeah.
Chapter 22. Tonner's point of view, in which he is feeling super sorry for himself because Else left him for young Alcor. Even though he has always known their relationship was secondary to the work, he is still hurt, which seems to confuse him. Heartbreak confuses even the most genius-brained among us. He wonders if his job now is to realize he is a minor figure in Elsa's story. Given later events, to me, this is a little bit of ironic foreshadowing. Mm-hmm. Tonner tells himself that all his hurt feelings are mere inconveniences, distractions from the work, which the night drinkers have screwed up for him.
Yeah, this is the first time in the narrative that you actually feel a little sorry for Tonner. And sure, he's an unlikable prick, but even unlikable pricks have feelings. And, you know, seeing your girlfriend choose another company over yours hurts. It hurts like hell to everyone. And virtually everyone has had a similar experience to empathize with. So this is effective. Yes,
it really is. It's also interesting how seeing through someone else's perspective helps you hate them less.
Yeah.
Tonner notes that this is their fifth knot turtle, the other four having died, presumably painful deaths of starvation or malnutrition. This one's going to die too because he's focusing on making Jessen's medication. He takes a sick little thrill in having stayed up all night again and mentions a psychological phenomenon wherein the pleasure of certain behaviors is enhanced by their harmful side effects rather than diminished, like when you drink with relish, knowing the next day will be miserable.
Yeah, this line always sticks out to me because I do not relish knowing that at all. Rather, I just sort of don't think about it or willingly delude myself otherwise. Otherwise, I get it. I understand.
Self-harm comes in many forms. I used to, when I was hungover, really want to go to Mass. I don't know why.
Wow, you should talk to your therapist about that.
We do.
Yeah.
Kampar, ray of sunshine, emerges from his living area and lightens the mood by asking if Tonner finds oatmeal stimulating. Then Tonner announces that he's made enough medicine for Jessen for 3 days, which I feel like does not garner the fanfare it deserves. Like, they should throw a little party. Totally. This is the first time he's made anything from the turtles, and it's something they really need.
Yeah.
And they're just like, cool. Kampar is like, but what about Tonner? And Tonner is like, leave me alone. I am trying. Kampar is like, I know, but these are small quarters, bro. And then he says he doesn't know how they could be more discreet. The etiquette books I've read don't cover sex in a prison camp. After their heart-to-heart, Tonner hears a strange noise in the hallway. He opens the door of the apartment and, whoopsie, lets in the night drinkers, there to attack after Jessen threatened them. Tonner and Campar fight the monkeys, who start throwing water balloons of acid at them. Tonner is overcome with the spirit of violence and fights back harder. At one point, he protects Jessen's freshly extracted medicine, and I was like, aw, he cares. But actually, I think he just didn't want his work ruined.
100%.
Campar is a big boy and very strong, and he kills some night drinkers. Then, Jessen, Ricker, Else, and Dafyd emerge from their bedrooms to join the fight. Tonner smashes a night drinker to death on the floor, and the survivors flee. Campar and Tonner wash off the acid and find it wasn't very potent, only causing mild chemical burns and not illness or death. Nothing like soft Lothar barf.
Nope.
While Tonner showers, he realizes it was very stupid of him to open the door without knowing what was out there, and that they should have drilled a spy hole or at least strategized more about keeping the quarters safe. He says they do better, but I'm not really sure they did. None of them have any training or talent in strategy, nor have they ever been under siege. Cinia checks on him, having rejoined the group in the face of this attack. Well, which I find so interesting.
Yeah.
While he's been showering, Jessen and the others have begun autopsying one of the dead night drinkers. The feather monkeys have recognizable innards, but evolved to work on their homeworld. The respiration system indicates that they're from a lower oxygen environment, and the gut contents indicate that they're herbivores. Tonner thinks to himself that the first thing his team did after being attacked was seek knowledge, and that they would survive because what they all want is to know. He is saying this about the whole group, but it's mostly only true of Dafyd.
Yeah, so first, this is another turnabout. Ding, right? But I think that there's an interesting contrast here between the group and Dafyd individually, because I recognize both impulses. I think the group all jumps into vivisecting the night drinker because doing that is something they're very familiar with and excel at, are among the best in Ajian about. And so there's a thrill in that comfort of doing something you're excellent at and trained for. It's like, I personally am great at bowling, so I will bowl any time. But if somebody asks me to go play pickleball, which I've never done, I don't want to do that because I'm not comfortable with it. Also, it seems very dorky.
And you won't be able to beat them.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to beat them. Exactly. But unlike everyone else, Dafyd is only too comfortable stepping outside his comfort zone. He loves the spider therapy, and that's why you get him talking to the Carryx, and everyone else is tinkering with lab equipment because that's who he is. He likes being uncomfortable, which again is bananas, but good for him.
Have you ever bowled a perfect game?
No, my best is like 220, so
it's pretty good.
It's not bad.
Tonner hands Jessen her medicine, and then he and Campar examine one of the acid water balloons. They realize that it's a version of the berries they've been experimenting on. So now they know what weapon the night drinkers use that to them is more deadly than a bomb, and they know that they have everything they need to make that weapon. Newly energized by the fresh project, Tonner rattles off a new work schedule and makes a little manager joke that his team graciously chuckles at. Then they all get to work, even though Tonner is on the verge of total exhaustion. Chapter 23. We switch to Dafyd and Else post-coital in Dafyd's room. Dafyd muses that of all the unthinkable events in his life, the fact that the universe had put him beside this woman felt the most unlikely. This is a man who is currently on an alien prison planet. He is down catastrophic.
just what a line. Oh my god.
Oh my god, Dafyd. Elseworm wakes up and asks him what he's thinking about. Dafyd has been thinking about Else, but he claims to have been thinking about why the Carryx gave them rooms with windows when certainly not all the apartments in the ziggurat have a view to the outside. Dafyd, who is a gifted expert at reading people in situations, cannot figure out what makes the Carryx tick, and it's making him nuts. Why do they win so much? Well, they're big and strong, says Else. Dafyd says that's the least dangerous thing about them. I'm relaying this conversation in some detail because I'm fascinated with how the swarm sees the Carryx versus how Dafyd does. Dafyd takes it as a given that understanding the Carryx mentality and methods and their why is key to understanding or key to surviving or even defeating them. Elsworm wants to learn about the Carryx but doesn't care about their motivations, only facts that will be directly beneficial to the war effort. So briefly, I was like, why is everyone being so stupid about this? It's obvious. And like Jessen also is like, I don't care anything about these people, these insects. Yep. I just want to kill them. It's obvious to me that understanding your enemy's motivations will help you predict their movements and thus beat them. But then I remembered that here on Earth, it wasn't until the mid-20th century that Western thought began to explore empathy as a tactic. Psychologists like Freud and Jung wanted to understand why the Nazi Empire happened, and then other psychologists wanted to understand serial killers later. And writing the enemy off as a uniquely evil monolith or force of nature is psychologically protective, but strategically very weak. Because we can tell ourselves we could never understand a murderer, but it's only if you understand them that you can keep them from killing again, as depicted in the documentary. I forget what it's called. You know, the one with the
Mindhunter?
Yeah.
Mindhunter. Yeah.
The documentary Mindhunter.
Correct.
The Carryx, too, have a cultural unwillingness to understand the humans. As Dafyd notes, they won't learn from the humans or teach them. The Carryx version of scientific inquiry is to torture an animal until they figure out how it can serve them. They also have no interest in internal lives.
Yeah, I wonder if the Carryx unwillingness or inability to empathize and or truly understand its subject species, their subject species, will be part of their downfall. And obviously, that's sort of the implication with the betrayer moniker that Ekur-Tklal throws around, but I think it's probably going to be more systemic than that. And we'll get to some evidence of the Carryx exposing themselves to danger without knowing it a little bit later on, even in this part, when they underestimate or lack understanding of a non-human species that that exposes them to real danger.
This is also a classic pitfall of racism, where you think you're just so superior to, or classism too, where the hegemonic group thinks they're so superior that they don't even realize they are in danger. Right. It used to happen all the time in Europe and America. Elsworm wonders why all this matters when they're trapped on the prison planet and can never get back to Augean. Dafyd says, "We've lost a lot, but I've still got some things I'd like to keep." Romance.
Cringe line, bro. Really cringe.
Cut to Jessin, who is realizing that her meds are taking hold because she has switched from suicidal to homicidal. Yeah. She's soothing herself to sleep by fantasizing about snapping night drinker necks. She and Cinia are chilling in her room, drinking tea substitute. Cinia's... I already said that. Cinia has already rejoined the group after their attack. Jessin recalls a time she and Irina had gone out for drinks and impassioned conversation.
So, the last episode, or the episode before, I thought you were just joking about the whole Jessin-Irina ship almost happening. But the way in this part, Jessin talks about this night where her and Irina were supposed to go dancing, but stayed up all night getting super drunk and talking intimately, makes me realize that I think it's pretty much canon, right? Like that's a date, friends.
This ship has set sail. It's shipping.
Yeah, and we also learn in this part that Jessin is canonically bi. She talks about her first kiss with a boy and a girl. And so I think that you are right. I think you're right that she had romantic feelings for Irina that she probably suppressed because of the work relationship. So I did not pick that up. Good for you for doing so.
This is what I just can't help. Noticing implied gay relationships.
I agree.
She soothes the pain of her longing for Irina and the time before by imagining killing a night drinker. Jessin is a perfect example of not wanting to understand the enemy to defeat it. She doesn't even truly believe the night drinkers possess language, and certainly isn't interested in learning about or preserving their species or culture. What if they had learned to communicate with the night drinkers and both species had collaborated on the project? Doesn't cross her mind. The two women join the lads in the common area, and Jessin notes that they've all... Do you think the Carryx would prevent that, though? I don't. You think they would like it?
I don't think that they would like it. I think that they would look at it as a neutral eventuality, because there's going to be some competition, right? Like that's what they're doing. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they would get super angry about it, but they're not mad when the night drinkers and the humans are fighting. They don't even care. And so I don't think that they would care if it were the converse, but maybe I'm wrong.
The two women join the lads in the common area, and Jessin notes that they've all adapted the uniform to their tastes. Campar wears his too small tunic with the collar popped so it at least drapes well. Tanner is all wrinkled and doesn't care or notice what he looks like. Ricker has that sexy, rumpled, straight out of bed look.
Yeah, it says, quote, on Ajian, he always had that slightly rumpled, slightly erotic style of an unmade Sunday morning bed. And now, on the prison world of the Carryx, he still did. And that's just hard eyes emoji all around. I think that's really a wonderful descriptor. And she notes that Ricker sort of rolls his sleeves and cuffs up just a little, which I also do. So I love Ricker all the more. Good for that.
That's a really excellent men's clothing hack to make it look cool.
Yep, great.
The guys are checking out the readout from their equipment. It looks like they've synthesized the acid the night drinkers filled their balloon grenades with. Jessin is reminded of her first day at Tanner's laboratory and how important and exciting it was, and how that seems silly now. Jessin half listens to Ricker and Tanner while thinking that the acid-filled balloon was once an animal. She thinks they know more about the enemy now. Tanner thinks they might have been suffering from oxygen poisoning, but Jessin doesn't give a shit. They killed Irina and it doesn't matter why. What she knows now is that how to kill them, and what Tanner knows now is more about their species.
Yep.
Jessin suggests that they field test the balloon grenades. At first, the others are hesitant, but when Jessin marches out the door with the grenades, they follow. Tanner puts the kibosh on gathering up Cinia, Else, and Dafyd to bring with them. Cinia kind of gets caught in the crossfire there. Jessin leads them to the night drinker's nest, and they proceed to fling the acid grenades into the nest, which begins to melt. It's like a foam with holes in it that reminds me of Chuck E. Cheese a lot when I visualize it.
Yes, I agree. That's great. That's great.
The night drinkers spill out screaming, and the humans kill all the ones that get close. The humans also commit an atrocity in the form of bombing night drinker medics. A big night drinker gestures at them, and Tanner hits it with a grenade.
Dude was trying to surrender. Well, tough, bro. Yeah.
Can't win them all. Battle won, the humans retreat, giddy with their victory. Jessin reflects that the night drinkers had tried everything they knew to beat the humans, and the humans had emerged unkillable as gods. Narratively, when someone compares themselves to their kind to gods, it pricks up one's ears.
Yeah, especially in a book called The Mercy of Gods. Yeah, good call.
Is it hubris? Is it good old fatal flaw hubris? Or something else? We'll find out. Hopefully. The war party arrives back at the quarters. Else wonders what happened, and Tanner says, more data. All coy and bitchy. Campar says, our version of the devil's... Well, will you read this one? You're so good at it.
Sure. Our version of their devil's brew is sufficiently evil.
They proceed to explain what happened, and Jessin thinks we've made 2 weapons, and I'm one of them.
It's an incredibly metal line. Good for her.
Extremely metal. Dafyd fears that attacking the night drinkers is playing into the Carryx's hands, but Campar asserts that they had little choice but to defend themselves. Jessin finally gets some good sleep. Chapter 24. This is one of my favorite chapters because we learn so much about the great enemy and the Carryx. We open on Ekur-Tklal, who is once again complaining. It hates travel.
Sure.
It hates being in asymmetric space where it can't reach the other Carryx, neither for information nor direction. It hates the burden of choice.
Yeah, like Devo says, if you got it, you don't want it. I'm wondering, is there anything that Ekur-Tklal likes? That's what I want to know, because it hates everything, as far as I'm aware.
It likes the Sovereign.
That's true. Okay. Right.
And it's like, it finds Carryx that are higher than it majestic, but I don't know if that's the same as liking them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It passes the journey by recording and analyzing the battle. Doesn't seem like the Carryx have any form of art or entertainment, just spreadsheets. E.T. knows that it may be demoted to soldier, and that it will never be promoted back into the highest levels of the Carryx, to the level in which its genetic material may be passed on. Its failure, it believes, is proof that it had deserved to fail. When E.T. has service again, his half-mind blows up with messages, including one from the regulator librarian, who's from one of the 8 limbs that direct reportedly to the Sovereign. In Carryx culture, the body of the state is a literal as well as metaphorical body. The Sovereign is the mind of the Empire. Her body produces its heirs, and her decisions are carried out by the limbs, which she controls. But that kind of gets explained in a later chapter. But I found it helpful to think, like, they talk about Ekur talks about the bureaucracy so much, and I was getting confused. So I was like, what is this? So I just, like...
Yep.
Ekur watches the video message from the regal, awe-inspiring regulator librarian, who is larger than Ekur and whose shell is silver and green filigree. The regulator librarian's eyes are able to focus on more than one image at once, as though it has two brains. In contrast, a soldier Carryx is simple, and its eyes look the same direction. So even though the soldier is also big, it is simple and not smart, like, even though usually you get bigger as you go up the ranks. Ekur's body chemistry changes, shifting it from a semi-independent mind to a mind open to the will of the species, which is the will of the sovereign.
Yeah, the fact that the Carryx get physically bigger as they go up the chain always reminds me of the Futurama joke, the why doesn't Ross, the largest friend, not simply eat the other five? It's just such a fun little detail that they just keep getting bigger.
Like lobsters.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you know that that's usually in the wild? If a lobster dies of old age, it's because its body gets too large for it to, like, catch food.
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah.
Love those guys. Unfortunately for Ekur-Tklal, the regulator librarian demotes it to interrogator. Ekur will get information out of the fivefold prisoners. Although interrogators are equal to subjugators, Ekur considers it a demotion because he finds interacting with non-Carryx animals so repulsive. After being given the order, Ekur's body... This is him choosing to suffer. After being given the order, Ekur's body begins to metamorphose into that of an interrogator. Ability to change the body according to the needs of the species is not unknown among animals. We all know about the frog DNA changing the dinosaurs from female to male in that woke movie Jurassic Park.
Absolute science. That happens, yes.
Jurassic Park is like one of the most scientifically, it's like the most hard sci-fi movie ever made.
I buy it, sure.
But we don't usually get the metamorphosing animal's perspective on the matter, which is interesting. Cut to the swarm. Elswarm and Cynia are walking around the cathedral watching out for night drinkers, which the swarm knows are nowhere near them, but it has to pretend to not know that since Else wouldn't know. The swarm has gotten so comfortable operating Else's body that it no longer feels like it's mimicking life, it feels alive.
That's an interesting note, ain't it?
It's so interesting. What is it to be alive?
It's almost as if that question keeps coming up in this narrative, almost.
Yes, it is. Cynia is making a map, I think, of the spaces they are allowed to explore. The swarm notes that the other prisoners have decorated the walls, made art in this place of fear. As they explore, the swarm hears a signal. It doesn't know how it knows, but it recognizes the signal as an SOS. Next, we switch back to rejoin Ekur-Tklal. It explains that normally, by the time a species has been collected by the Carryx, the half-minds have already gotten enough data to begin interpreting communications. Since the fivefold captives were captured in battle, the half-minds are starting from scratch. ET is supervising the process of experimenting on the captives until the half-minds learn to communicate with them. It dislikes animals so much it can't stand to interact with its Sinin assistants as a group, choosing one individual who seems to have a good rapport with the other Sinin as its proxy. When Ekur is intrigued by the metallic threads in the captive's 5 arms, the Sinin relays the command to the vivisectionists. The half-mind reaches base competency in the captive's language, and Ekur goes to interrogate one that is in a tank under UV light. Ekur describes the fivefold enemy's communication method as a mist of esters and cyclic terpenes, a burst of radio waves on a combination of frequencies, unquote.
Yeah, it also states that the fivefold enemy's communication was, quote, a combination of chemical release and electromagnetic waves. So when they converse, they remain silent except for the half-mind's translation. And I think that's important. I think it does sort of invoke the descriptions of live suits in Live Suit, but I think it's one of those. It's an interesting thing that they are actually silent. They don't speak.
That is interesting, and I'm wondering, so radio waves, are they just radioing their message directly into the half-mind?
Yeah, it could be. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just like texting the half mind. Yeah, so, and I'm so interested in the way a member of one species might describe another species, where you're like, even if you knew the species being described, you wouldn't recognize it.
Right.
With this system of communication, the captive informs E.T. that the fivefold enemy did not evolve and did not come from a star system. E.T. assumes this is a religious delusion and rephrases the question. It asks where the captive's species lived before it learned interstellar travel, and the captive says its kind was created as a tool of the war, designed life, like half minds made of life. E.T. finds designed life even more repulsive than it finds animals. The Carryx have encountered it before, such as in the stone mind of High Lothark. And
420, baby. 420. The stoned mind of the High Lothark. Spark it up, baby.
To create a simulacrum of life from living flesh is simply perverse.
Yeah, it says they were perversions, imitations of mind, doomed to degradation and death, like an animal fed nothing but its own waste. I mean, the guy can paint a phrase. That's all I'm saying.
He's got a vivid way with words for sure.
Yeah.
E.T. asks who built the fivefold captives. The captive replies, they call themselves Anjali. Their flesh is made from semi-stable plasma, and they build their cities in the coronas of stars. This is obvious bullshit. E.T. is like, answer me true or you get the UV light again. The half-mind absolutely butchers the translation when the fivefold captive tells E.T. to go fuck his mother, you shit-eater. E.T. turns up the UV light and settles in for long, tedious torture sesh.
Okay, so this part is obvious, super important, not just to the story, but also to the grand theory of humans as the great enemy. And it's the part that I see most often cited as evidence that the humans are not the great enemy. And because the fivefold enemy here do not really seem human. It talks about how they have metallic filaments, they communicate, as we talked about, through chemoreception and radio only. They have fivefold symmetry, which is a thing that could mean a lot of different things, but from the strictest perspective means that they look like starfish, right? And they also talk about how they're designed life. But if you take a step back and read these parts closely, I think the similarities to human/live suit life outweigh the differences. Humans, especially humans whose outer layer has been compromised, hate UV light. I hate UV light. I don't like going out in the sun. That's why I live in San Francisco, because there isn't the sun. And they also hold each other. Humans also hold each other when they're in distress, which is something that James S.A noted is a primate trait about 50 times throughout the Expanse narrative. That's goes back to the Pleistocene era, is holding each other in times of distress. And it talks about the fivefold enemy doing that here. That's not an accident. By the way, as an aside, shout out to DFC Fenario Garcia on Reddit for correcting me that it was actually Dan who has the biology degree, not Ty. Also for suggesting additional compression on the recording. We're doing our best. I guarantee I will make more mistakes, so please keep them coming. But anyway, that's not to say that I think that these fivefold enemies are totally human. I don't, but they're clearly human derived. I think that they are. And I think that the fact that E.T. calls bullshit here, as you pointed out, indicates that E.T. is perhaps fully aware of who the great enemy is, and is therefore aware that if they're fighting on behalf of the great enemy, they're fighting on behalf of humans. And so Daniel Abraham even said on Reddit when asked, how could the Carryx not know that the humans were the great enemy? Quote, that's an interesting question, Ennit, E-N-N-I-T, question mark, end quote. Which is a very Carryx-like answer, Dan. But I also think it indicates that the authors want us to think that the Carryx don't know who the great enemy is, but I think that they actually do. So this might be the first time that they have encountered these types of fivefold enemies of violence, and I think the fact that the half-mind didn't automatically know how to communicate with them indicates that it probably is. But I do think that the fivefold enemy are maybe telling the truth when they say that they did not exist in the way that they are being put forth before the creation of the ships that they pilot, because they're sort of advanced live suits and they were, or they're types of live suits, and they were designed to be these types of animals of violence. So to me, this section, even though a lot of people cite it as a reason why the great enemy are not human, to me it's actually another stick on the pile of that these starship troopers are actually advanced live suit / swarm tech and are fighting on behalf of the humans. That's, to me, that's my interpretation.
I agree. I think the details of this interaction very easily could be read to support the starfish troopers being, like you said. Also, I think it's super important that the swarm starts talking about feeling alive. And we know that the live suit also can sort of take over life.
Yep.
So just some things to think about. I was kind of the thing that was holding me back on this theory is that they seem so unaware of, like, it's not clear that they know to me that the Angianians are human, but they could know that and also know they're not in contact with the rest of humanity.
Yeah, and I think that's the most likely scenario. I really do. I think that that's how they knew, for example, about how to keep humans alive, and that
right.
They knew that they needed razors and whatnot. They knew how to deal with humans. They just, because as we talked about, they don't care enough to really understand them. They just sort of like kind of lump in all that shit.
Yeah.
Or kind of like, it's like, well, that's close enough. And I think it's the most likely scenario that they know Angianis are human, that they know that the great enemy is human, but they also know that the Angianis are not in contact with the greater human empire. And they came to that conclusion after they didn't see a protector in the initial attack on Ajian that we covered in the second episode, that they were looking for a protector. They were looking to see whether these guys were part of the greater human empire. They didn't see it. And so they're like, all right, fuck it. We're going to take over this particular set of humans.
We can finally get some humans, which are one of the smartest beings in the universe, to be our slaves.
That's right. That's right.
Fascinating.
That's my thought. I could be wrong.
Of course. But are you ever really?
It's happened once or twice.
Okay, then we go back to the swarm. It is trying to slip out of the living quarters unnoticed to investigate the distress signal, but everyone is all jumpy from fear of the night drinkers. At last, it is able to leave unseen and walks purposefully in the direction of the faint signal. The swarm reshapes Elsa's body, growing dark patches on her skin, which I'm not sure if they're a disguise or part of the detection organs, but it figures none of these other aliens really know what a human looks like, so it's probably safe. The swarm moves through the ziggurat, generally going upward, upstairs and narrow stone ladders until the sound of wind taps at the air. Which is a beautiful line. Up here, there aren't as many other aliens, but there's a lot of Carryx soldiers. The swarm stops Elsa's body from producing scent and lightens her footfalls. It almost gets made by a sign-in, and then when it gets nearly to the signal, there's a huge Carryx in the way. The swarm ducks into a side room and does something to Elsa's body that would shorten her life if she wasn't already going to die when the swarm leaves. The swarm makes contact with the signal. It tells the swarm not to approach, that it is a prisoner. The swarm asks, "What are you?" And the captive replies with a huge data download of the events of the Ayaya battle. As soon as the download is complete, the captive cuts off the signal. The swarm realizes they were heard, and soon Sinan and Soft Lothark will be hunting the recipient of the message. Elsa's consciousness tells the swarm to run. The swarm thinks it should, play it cool, look more human, and just say that it was lost. But Amir points out that if anyone catches them here, they'll connect the two odd things, the signal and the misplaced prisoner, and connect them. The swarm, like Dafyd, spends its journey back to the cathedral, reviewing all it knows. It takes delight in reviewing information about the Carryx dying by the hundreds on Ayaya. Truly, to have a worthy op is a source of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
The swarm wants to get back to its makers in the war so bad, but it has to stay here on the prison planet for at least a little longer.
Yeah, so I think that the fact that the swarm can automatically communicate on the same level as the fivefold enemy is another one of those sticks on the pile that indicates that they're similar tech, probably from the same people.
Totally agree. Meanwhile, E.T.'s Sinan assistant has the unpleasant task of telling E.T. about the intercepted signal. In an interaction familiar to anyone who has had an unreasonable and terrifying boss, the Sinan downplays the signal, saying it could have just be the fivefold captive malfunctioning under stress. E.T. believes that there is nothing within signal distance of the captives that could do anything with the information. Nevertheless, it prepares to torture information about the signal out of the captives.
Lol, how wrong you are, E.T., you fuckhead. Anyway, as I talked about earlier, I think this is one of the clues about the Carryx having particular blind spots. So in the next part, Dafyd interviews the Phylarchs of Osterdeem, the Bone Horses, and it says of the Phylarch says of the Ziggurats, quote, "All of this you see we built, not the Carryx. They live well within it. They make use of it. Even then, they see only its use, not its spirit. They have no soul for it. We do not weep for them. One servant sees a slice of the spectrum, hears a fraction of the music, and is content. Why should the masters be different?" End quote. And I think that there's more to this passage than its lyricism. The Phylarchs built this place, and the Carryx use it. But as demonstrated, they don't entirely understand it. They don't feel the music or the spirit, as the Phylarch said, but they also don't know, they don't entirely know how the place can be used against them. That this place can transmit those signals sent out and received in one area. And because they don't believe that they are vulnerable while they're in this place, they are, in fact, at risk. Because, as we know, once the swarm gets its package of info back to the Great Enemy, the Great Enemy will have not only everything the swarm knows, but everything those captives know as well. And so I just think that this is hinting perhaps the very first hints that the Carryx way of incorporating all of these various species without truly understanding them, without truly getting to know them and getting to know their strengths and weaknesses, empathizing with them, as we talked about earlier, it is going to be, their downfall. That is maybe the first, example of that, and we'll I guess keep track of that. By the way, this is several different turnabouts. This whole chapter. Oh my God!
So many turnabouts.
So ding ding ding. And this chapter is straight bonkers important, and I completely missed a bunch of stuff in it the first few times I went through it, and I think that's intentional. We're all coming down from the sort of the high of the group beating on the night drinkers, and so the brain automatically thinks that the next thing to happen is maybe less important, but it's not at all, not remotely. That this chapter is way more important in the long run than them, beating up on the night drinkers.
It really is. I love clues and puzzles.
Yep.
Chapter 25. Ricker, like Dafyd, is starting to miss being left out now that he's been included again. He thinks the quiet and still of sitting with Cinia all day allowed him to psychologically heal in a way that the others haven't been able to. The others, under Tonner's whip hand, had created an imitation of their old life. But in reality, they all have two lives, before the Carryx and after. Ricker thinks being separate from the group allowed him to integrate this into his psyche better than the others seem to have. He thinks also that he will need to start joining Else and Cinia on their recon walks, but he doesn't want to because it's so overwhelming out there with so many different kinds of aliens. They all feel it, except Dafyd, who Ricker admits he didn't think much of before all this. Now it seems like Dafyd is better equipped than any of them to adapt to the situation.
Yeah, look at Ricker starting to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of the group. Good for you.
He's too sweet and pretty to evaluate people's character. Ricker asks Dafyd if the librarian would give them some paint. Not to decorate, but to paint a sign on the door so that any other humans will know they're there. Campar jokes that they should write "Beware of Dog" or "No Trespassing," and Ricker says they should put "Student Financial Aid," which makes everyone laugh. Then something scratches at that very door, and they all freeze in terror. Weapons gathered and wagons circled, Dafyd cracks open the door to find the night drinkers outside. Realizing, he closes it again, and they confer, and they realize that if they simply barricade the door, Else and Cinia will be killed when they return. So Dafyd opens the door again. A dozen night drinkers are in the hallway. They all enact the Carryx bow, chest flat to the floor and arms outspread, and their leader lays a translator box and a severed head at Dafyd's feet. Then makes the same gesture the night drinker had made after they bombed the nest, and Riker realizes it's a gesture of surrender. The night drinker uses the translation box to say, "No more war, no more fighting, no more."
One wonders how the night drinkers would have done if they had gone with their original title, War, What Is It Good For?
But
Yeah, I'm going to make a Friends reference and a Seinfeld reference in the same episode. I'm doing it.
A man of many tastes.
Yeah.
Dafyd tries to have more of a conversation and asks if the night drinkers are brought here against their will, but the creatures run away instead. Kampar wonders if the peace offering was sincere. I don't mean to imply that the alien monkey is a liar, but... Tanner notes that one was so sincere it gave up its life for the offering. Dafyd picks up the translator and says it changes everything. Tanner, for once not being shitty, is kind of curious about what it actually changes. Dafyd strolls out into the cathedral and finds a giant, naked, multi-eyed spider bear. He asks if the bear can help them, and the bear says it can. So Dafyd asks if it has seen any other humans. Smash cut to Jellet!
Yes.
Oh, the scream that I scrubbed when I read Jellet sat down gingerly. Jellet has been injured in a fight that we do not learn more about. But they've also been experiencing violence, his little group. He is settling down for watch duty in his group's living quarters, and his group includes Lauren Morse. That guy is still around.
Mon Dieu! He's still here. Good for him.
Jellet reflects that he can't fight due to his injury, but he can shout, and he likes watch duty because he can dim the lights in the common area, which is one of the short list of things in his control. Helping him keep watch is the Saturday night special Kel had rigged up. Quote, a little black knot of violence waiting for its moment. They only have 3 cartridges left. Tanner's group is unsuccessfully following directions, and Jellet's group has manufactured a firearm.
That is the variations on the human spirit right there.
While Jellet is keeping watch, he hears some noises in the hallway. It could just be the house settling, but it keeps getting louder, and it's coming closer, and he's getting so scared. And then he hears a voice he almost recognizes, and he pulls the door open, and there is his beloved sister Jessin and her coworkers or whatever. And that is where the chapter and part end. What storytelling?
Love that. We skipped some turnabouts, so ding ding there, I think.
We're dinging,
yeah.
We're dinging.
We're dinging. I love that end. Love that end.
Mm-hmm.
So, some foreshadowing, I think we're going to hit a little bit. You mentioned the part where Jellet where they're following the night drinkers when they initially encounter them in this part. And Jessin mentions that humans are endurance hunters. And I think that's foreshadowing. I think we're going to see that play out in the Great War. And also, assuming that the Trap World Ajian theory is right, that's an endurance strategy. That's sort of like playing the long game. So I think that line, which reads like a toss-off line, is probably going to be a lot more important as we go forward, and maybe that's something that we will pay attention to as we get more books in this storyline. But I like the idea of humans as endurance hunters.
I do too. That's another thing. Jessin says a lot of things that are like inspiring or like uplifting to me personally. Like the idea of a human as an endurance hunter is great to think about when you're just like in a slog of some sort and you're just like, I just have to wait whatever this is out.
Yep, that's a good point.
Like, have you seen that meme that's like, don't chase your dreams. Humans are endurance hunters. Just follow it at a reasonable pace until it gets tired and lies down. Yeah, I love us for that.
That's good.
Thank you. Tanner's thoughts about Else and him not being in each other's stories, I thought it came back to haunt me when Else kind of slipped right out of the narrative because, and this is my bias probably as a romance reader, but Dafyd's important and he loves Else, so you can't get rid of Else. Spoilers, you can get rid of Else.
Yeah. Well, so Elsa's going to live on, right? Like, she's going to live on in the swarm. I assume we're going to get more interiority from the swarm. I'm wondering if that line is foreshadowing of the swarm eventually taking Tanner. which would be fascinating, I think.
Super fascinating. I just thought it was funny on a personal level for me when Else not only wasn't part of, like, it seemed when he said that, like, Else was going to be the ongoing character and Tonner would probably not be in the next book. But
yeah, I agree.
Incorrect. Tonner will be in the next book for sure.
Sadly.
Someone on Reddit was like, I should have written down their name, but they were like, wow, you guys really hate Tonner.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so let's talk about Stoicism.
Yeah, so on a whim, I decided to read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And it's not really on a whim, Brigid. It's because Marcus Aurelius' Meditation shows up quite a bit in Black Sails, which you have not seen, and you are duty bound to watch sometime soon. And anyway,
it shows up a lot in Gladiator too.
It does. I have not seen the new Gladiator, so I'm excited to do that. But early in book 1 in Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, there's a reference in the translation that I am reading, at least, to, quote, the mercy of the gods, in a passage about how lucky Marcus Aurelius is to have grown up rich. And so obviously the phrase stuck out to me, so I did a search to see if the phrase ever came up again, and lo, it did. In book 11 of 12, which continues the theme of essentially the overall theme of the Meditations, which is essentially control what you can and accept what you can't. That's the theme. The phrase strikes again. And when I found this passage, I was like, well, we have to talk about this. I don't really know what it means entirely yet because I just found it today, but I think it's really relevant. And so this is book 11 of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, clause 7. And quote is, a branch cut off from the continuity of that which was next unto it must needs be cut off from the whole tree. So a man that is divided from another man is divided from the whole society. A branch is cut off by another, but he that hates and is averse cuts himself off from his neighbor, and knows not at the same time he divides himself from the whole body or corporation. But herein is the gift and mercy of God, the author of this society, in that once cut off, we may grow together and become part of the whole again. I'm going to read that again. Once cut off, we may grow together and become part of the whole again. I think that's important. Interesting. But, and then going back to the quote, but if this happen, often the misery that is the further a man is run in this division, the harder he is to be reunited and restored again. And however the branch which once cut off, and however the branch which once cut of afterwards was grafted in, gardeners can tell you is not like that which sprouted together at first, and still continued in the unity of the body. So a lot there, and I don't entirely know what it means, but what I'm getting from that, Brigid, and you can kind of help me wrap my head around it, is dividing men from each other is bad, right? And you divide yourself from the society and you grow up lesser than the whole. And in fact, the last sentence is essentially the act of dividing, of cutting off that branch, makes both branches, both parts of the whole worse.
Right. And
right?
You can never kind of graft it back together. Even after you graft it back together, it's still kind of fucked up.
Yeah. But again, the gift and the mercy of God, of the mercy of gods, or God, is that once cut off, we may grow together and become part of the whole again. Even if it's not as good as you want it to be, right? As good as it could have been, if you were not split off, you can get back together. You can become part of the whole again.
Yes.
So, I think that there's a lot of overlap. Brigid, what do you think about this?
So many things jumping out at me right away. I mean, we've had many cutting off branches and gardening metaphors already.
Yeah.
To break the limb is part of the Carryx culture. And also, Anjin is cut off from the rest of humanity.
Right.
Hating, like the thing where it's like he's hateful and is averse and he cuts himself off. And I feel like that ties in also with what we're talking about how when you don't, like, not understanding leads to hatred, leads to more not understanding, and you don't want to understand your enemy. Like, this section is so much about, like, empathy and understanding versus not that. Hatred and aversion, I guess, would be the opposite. And this Marcus Aurelius passage also is saying, like, hating people, like, when you cut yourself off by hating, you're making yourself weaker.
And dividing yourself
right.
from other parts of the body.
Right.
From other parts of the body. And as you pointed out when I first sent this to you, the word moiety means parts of the whole, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the phrase that the Carryx use, is that when they talk about the human moiety or the phylact moiety, they're talking about parts of the whole being the Carryx structure, the body. And those branches are cut off, or those branches may be averse, or you may hate that branch. But
yes,
I think what Marcus Aurelius is saying, and I don't know, I think that the thrust of this book might be, is that that's a bad way of going about it. That the real thing, what you want to do is you want to be whole. You want to have an understanding and empathy of the whole in order to be able to grow together.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think, there might be something to this. Look, again, I apologize for bringing up philosophy, but I think that the Carryx philosophy, which is stated over and over again, is that which is, it can be no other way, which is a very sort of stoicist phrase.
Totally.
It is very similar to control what you can and accept what you can't, which is the theme of Marcus Aurelius, the theme of kind of stoicism in general. That's not to say that, it's a perfect one-to-one fit, but I think it does reflect sort of that, when we talked about Plato earlier, that sort of like classical philosophy, that sort of really ultra utilitarian philosophy that the Carryx employ, and this is an expression of it. And I think that when we get more into the human response to the Carryx, we're going to get more into sort of, maybe we're going to get more into like sort of Renaissance thinkers or natural rights or, Eastern philosophy, that sort of thing, that rebukes a lot of this as simplistic, overly simplistic, and ultimately harmful. Yes.
It strikes me again that there's a fungal mycelium on Jin because
yes,
because many people in this trying time here on Earth have been talking about how interesting it is that a fungal body is able to, like, it's one organism that's spread out so many places with so many little tendrils, but it's like integrated completely into the earth and the trees and everything. And I think people are seeing that a little bit as like a model for how humans can be, where we're kind of like, if we treat humanity as a whole organism, we'll be better off than treating it like individual cells, which we are one whole organism because we do communicate with each other in ways that we don't consciously know of, much like a mycelia. And it's kind of the opposite of this philosophy where each individual thing is like slotted into this thing and you can't move and it's pretty rigid. And I wouldn't be surprised if the rigidity of classical philosophy is contrasted with other forms of thinking, like you were saying in the upcoming stuff.
Yeah. Something to keep our eye out. At any rate, this passage feels very Mercy of Godsy, and so I'll have to think about it and chew on it, and we'll talk about it further in future episodes, maybe. Who knows?
I'm gonna read a bunch of Schopenhauer and we'll figure it out.
Sounds
I'm
good.
not. I don't know anything about philosophy. I just picked a random one. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. We do very much appreciate reviews and follows and stuff. And this was so much fun. Please come back next time when we cover part 5, Fissure.
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 Sounds fun. Yeah. You can follow us on Buzzsprout or wherever you get your podcast. You can also send us an email at themercyofpods@gmail.com. You can follow us on Reddit or Instagram at themercyofpods. Also Threads, I guess. Our logo is by Matt House. The music is Push the Button by Sid Luscious and the Pants, available wherever you get your music. Yeah, I'm excited. Let's go.
Whatever is.
That which is. It can be no other way.
Push the button.